All right. So for today, I think we have a really good one. We are both going to be defending bad movies. Sticking with the way we've been doing a lot of these podcasts, we've done top fives with an honorable mention. But the goal of today is if the movie has either a 6 out of 10 or lower on IMDb, or under a 60% on Rotten Tomatoes, which means it is certified rotten. That's how we're classifying them as bad movies. I also wanted to point out that for Rotten Tomatoes, that doesn't mean that people were giving it a 6 out of 10. It would mean 60% of people liked it, 40% did not. So it's kind of different than the IMDb scale. Just wanted to put that out there just in case. And yeah, this one should be very interesting. I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to you to get us started.
Hey, awesome. So I am one who is known for a lot of bad movies. I'm typically the one that has the very hot takes when it comes to, movies that most people think are bad that I actually think have a lot of value or that I genuinely enjoy. So this list it was hard for me to make in the way of just deciding what to put on there. So for my honorable mention, I went with a movie that I don't really like the term guilty pleasure movie because I don't really feel guilty about liking the things that I like. But if there was like a movie that I would consider like a guilty pleasure movie for me, it's definitely this one. So this is from 2009, the movie 2012. So 2012 has a 5.8 out of 10 on IMDb, so just a little bit below our criteria, but the Rotten Tomato score is a lot lower at 39%. So 2012 is a Roland Emmerich film. Most people know Roland Emmerich as the disaster movie guy who's done such things as Independence Day, The Patriot. He recently did Moonfall. He did The Day After Tomorrow. And personally, I think just overall, Roland Emmerich is a director that I tend to enjoy. Like, yes, he makes schlocky movies. Yes, he makes these big budget B movies, but that's what I love and appreciate about him. So I just think in general, he's a director that I defend because I think he succeeds at making the movies that he's trying to make. And I also think he does sort of what Michael Bay does, but he doesn't get nearly as much credit as Michael Bay does. But for 2012 specifically, 2012 is about a down on his luck writer named John Cusack who is divorced and seeking to rekindle the relationship with his kids. And he basically ends up having to protect his kids and get his family to safety during the 2012 apocalypse. So this movie was made before the year 2012, but back then, there was that whole speculation with the Mayan calendar that the world was going to end in 2012. So this is about the world actually ending in 2012. So he just plays this regular guy who's just trying to rekindle his relationship with his family when this all set on the backdrop of this apocalypse happening. There's a couple different characters too, like there's a scientist working with the government. The government's trying to create these arcs that will save humanity and preserve some humanity for the future. But overall, what I like about this movie is just like what I said about Emmerich. It is schlocky, B movie fun. I don't think it's trying to be anything else, and it just succeeds at doing that. I think Emmerich is known for disaster movies, and this is literally the peak disaster movie. Now, some of the CGI has not aged well, and there is an overuse of CGI, but just this movie literally has it all because the world is ending, literally a global apocalypse. So it has floods, it has freezes, it has volcanoes, lava, earthquakes, literally everything happening all across the globe. So immediately, if that's just sort of your thing, then this movie is definitely going to be your thing too. So I think that this movie is just the peak disaster movie in that genre. I also just think one thing that's really underrated about this movie is I'm actually pretty compelled by the story of Cusack, of his character, because what I really like about apocalypse stories, like end of the world stories or post apocalyptic stories, is how society sort of flips. And what I mean by that is, for instance, in this movie, John Cusack plays this unemployed writer who's like working as like a limo driver on the side because no one buys his book. He's literally just not even a regular guy. He's basically a bum at this point, but he becomes this super key person when it comes to the end of the world. And so I've always sort of liked those stories where it's like, the first will be last, last will be first sort of thing, where society and culture sort of turns on its head because you realize in the apocalypse when society breaks down that the structures of society might not have been that strong to begin with. So I always find that very compelling. As someone who loves science, I always love when movies just spew movie science and it makes absolutely no sense. But I love all the little jargon and exposition that they give. And this movie is just like the king of goofy movie science. Like you have, neutrinos from the sun evolving into a new particle, which is somehow destroying the earth. Like literally just stuff that doesn't make any sense. But they give it a lot of fake movie science, and I just kind of love and chuckle when movies do that. And yeah, and just overall, one big thing in this movie that I appreciate too is it actually talks about a lot of interesting ethical issues, specifically about like wealthy versus poor when it comes to the apocalypse and like in the face of disaster. And I think it does actually a really good job of sort of like deconstructing what would actually happen in an apocalypse because you have the government and these rich people who pay for seats on these things called arcs to basically ride out the apocalypse. But those workers that helped build those arcs, they don't get to go on there because they're just workers. Who cares about them, right? Or just the regular people don't get to go on there. Only the rich get to go on there. And of course, the politicians have to go on there. And so it sort of creates this interesting, discussion about, are the elites just going to save their own butts in the apocalypse? Well, probably so. But this movie actually sort of tackles that ethical issue a little bit. So this is just a movie that, like I said, it's like a comfort movie. Now, it's not very well received, as I said before. A lot of people that I know in real life think it's just the dumbest movie ever, but I just think it actually has a lot more to offer, and it is one that I definitely enjoy as someone who just loves disaster movies in general. So yeah, 2012, a bad movie that I will defend.
So it's interesting. I remember seeing this movie when I was really young when it first came out, and I liked it. But I guess I would have been 10 or 11, and I haven't watched it since. So I don't know if I can necessarily speak too much on it. But like you said, uh, or I should say, like I said, liked it when I was younger. I also will say I am a complete sucker for social economic stuff. So anything that talks about fun with social class, I am all in. Also, I was trying to see what other movies I had seen that Roland has done, and he directed The Patriot, which is a bona fide classic, so he's already okay in my book. And then I really like 10,000 BC, though I know that one was not received well. So yeah, now I am curious because I know that you personally like this IP. It looks like he did 1998's Godzilla. Do you like that one?
Can neither confirm nor deny if that will be included on this list.
Okay. We don't, for the listeners at home, since it's more fun for us, we don't talk about our lists beforehand. So if I accidentally spoiled, I apologize. I'll just leave it at that. I will say I've had Moonfall on my list for a while and I just haven't watched it yet, but it looks like that's his most recent movie, so I am excited.
Very underrated director, in my opinion. So
I do like your you calling him like a baby Michael Bay because it looking at his movies, it totally seems like that fits perfectly.
exactly, no one gives him the credit they give Michael Bay, but they basically are very similar.
Um, I can neither confirm nor deny if Michael Bay will appear on my list. So moving into my honorable mention, I cheated a little bit in that. So first, let me say, much like you said, I love bad movies. I find myself defending bad movies awesome. Because, like you said, generally speaking, the bad movies are the guilty pleasures, are the ones that are just fun to sit down and watch. And so, when creating this list, I didn't necessarily want to rank them solely on which ones I like more. I tried to rank them based off of what society deems as bad, and then I'm going to defend them. So it felt wrong to me to not include all of the Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer films as my honorable mention. Now, You may be saying, who are those? Who are they? Excuse me. They're the people who do all of the parody movies. So going through their filmography, Spy Hard, Scary Movie. Yes, they did do the first one. They didn't do any of the sequels. Date Movie, Epic Movie, Meet the Spartans, Disaster Movie, Vampires Suck, The Starving Games, Best Night Ever, and Superfast. In total, removing Scary Movie, of course, because everybody loves that one, they average a Rotten Tomato score of 2%. So pick one, and everybody hates it. But in my opinion, especially when I was younger, these movies are purely there just to be fan fodder is not the right word, but it just pure enjoyment. These are not smart movies. You're not going to sit down and learn something. They're not debating social class. It is something that you sit down because you just have had a long day at work and you want to you want to relax. Speaking specifically on Superfast, which has a 0% rating, as someone who is a huge fan of the Fast and Furious franchise, this one makes fun of the first five movies, and there is one scene where the actor who plays The Rock just keeps grunting and rubbing baby oil on himself, and in every scene he adds more baby oil. Just little stuff like that is hilarious because if you've seen those movies, The Rock always looks like he's a gigantic baby. And so it's just little stuff like that's just funny. Not every joke's going to hit. As you get older, your perspective may change. And so, in my personal opinion, 1996's Spy Hard is one of the funniest parody movies. I personally put that up there with like Men in Tights, Blazing Saddles, Airplane. Like that one's really good. But then, of course, it goes downhill from there. But the moral of the story is many lists consider these movies as the worst movies ever made. And so, to start off the defending bad movies, I had to put them here because, yes, they're bad, but they're fun. And like I always say on this podcast, there's a difference between good movies and bad movies. I mean, there's a difference between good movies and fun movies, and they can be mutually exclusive. These are very fun movies. I highly recommend them. Pick the one that matches the genre you like the most, and you will probably enjoy it. You'll just have a good laugh.
Yeah, I'm looking at their filmography right now on Wikipedia. I've seen Scary Movie, I've seen Meet the Spartans, and I've seen Vampires Suck. I might have seen The Starving Games. That one I think I might have seen, but for sure just at least those three. Um, I really only remember Scary Movie, and I am a big fan of Scary Movie, but like as you pointed out, that's like their most well-received one. It's because I think I watched like Meet the Spartans and Vampire Suck when I was like a lot younger, and I barely remember them.
I I should specify as well, and I'll use the Starving Games example because that's how you just reminded me. If you're somebody who has fond memories of a specific year, these movies also serve as time capsules for that year. As an example, in the Starving Games, one of the competitors is literally the knockoff version of Ted from the movie, so like the talking teddy bear, and they do stuff like that. In Epic Movie, Snooki, I think is her name, the girl from Jersey Shore, she's in there just because at that point in time, Jersey Shore was the most popular thing on the planet. So like it's kind of funny to look back and see what was popular at the time because they just shove them into these movies and it's very funny.
Definitely would recommend at least the first couple Scary Movies. I know you said they were only involved in the first one. The other ones I just don't remember well enough. I'd have to check them back out. It seems like they haven't worked in a while.
No, I mean their movies all do so terrible that if I'm not mistaken, they well, let's see here. No, never mind. They
Those they were
actually except for Starving Games. No. Superfast, sorry. Superfast had a $20 million budget and it only made 2 million. So that probably is what did them in because all the other ones they at least made back money on their budget, and then Superfast just tanked super hard. So I wonder if that's why they haven't really been active.
Wikipedia says they were supposed to do a parody of Taken and a parody of Star Wars, but both of them kind of fizzled out and never got made.
There is a parody of Taken called Tooken, and uh, I don't know if anybody has ever seen Oz, but Beecher, played by Lee Turgison, is the main character of Tooken. And I highly recommend this movie as well. Just if you, once again, it's if you like this style of movie, if you like parodies that are just purely there to poke fun at stuff. But there's one scene in this movie specifically. It's a bad movie, so I'll defend Tooken for a second as well. But this one, there's one scene alone that makes this movie worth watching.
Interesting. I appreciate the Family Guy taken parody a lot. One of my favorite episodes, but yeah. All right. So my number 5 is one of my favorite comedies of all time, which is very rare because if you know me, I'm not too big on straightforward comedies. They don't tend to be some of my favorite movies, but this one is one of my favorite comedies. It's been one of my favorite comedies, but it's never been well received at all. So it is also from 2009, coincidentally, but it is Land of the Lost with Will Ferrell. It has a 5.3 out of 10 on IMDb and only a 26% on Rotten Tomatoes. So this was brought to us from a script by Chris Henchy and Dennis McNicholas. They also brought The Other Guys, which is another one of my favorite movies, comedy movies of all time, and The Campaign, which I also like as well. And it was directed by Brad Sobering, who for some reason has a really weird filmography. He did like Casper, he did the series of Unfortunate Events with Jim Carrey, and then he brought us this. So I am just right off the bat a huge Will Ferrell fan. He's probably he is my favorite comedic actor. Most people like Adam Sandler. The way most people are like with Adam Sandler, I'm like with Will Ferrell. Um, and I like a lot of even his bad movies as well, quote unquote bad movies. And this just happens to be one of them. So in this one, in Land of the Lost, Will Ferrell plays Dr. Rick Marshall, who is this scientist. He's this paleontologist who develops this weird theory about like time travel and time warps and stuff like that. And basically, no one takes him seriously, and he gets laughed out of mainstream science. And he basically goes to seek proof for his theories, and he finds it and ends up getting sucked into this interdimensional space called the Land of the Lost, where time and space and dimensions just all collide into one. And it's not just Will Ferrell; it stars Anna Friel, and it stars Danny McBride, and also Jorma Taccone from The Lonely Island. Um, so yes, so as a comedy, this to me is one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. This is like my go-to if I need to laugh. This is just one of the movies that I'd watch. I just find it so funny. The jokes all land. It doesn't strike me as like really cheap, cheesy jokes like in a lot of bad, quote unquote, bad comedies. I genuinely think that this is a really funny movie. And it also has so many quotable one-liners that I still quote to this day, whether it's Matt Lauer can suck it, or I never trust a guy in a tunic, things like that. I find myself quoting this all the time. I also just love the supporting cast. Like I said, obviously I love Will Ferrell, but Anna Friel is great. She's from a show I used to watch called Pushing Daisies. That's really good. And then this was actually my intro to Danny McBride. I know it's not like the first movie he did, but like me seeing this as like a 10, 11-year-old, this is when I was first introduced with Danny McBride, and he is hilarious in this movie. And then obviously, like I said, Jorma Taccone plays this like ape man hybrid Chaka, and he is great and also funny as well without even actually having lines. But yeah, it's just got a great cast. It's got great humor, many quotable lines. And it's sort of just like a nostalgic movie for me because I used to watch this for better or for worse because it's got really raunchy moments. But for better or for worse, I used to watch this all the time. It used to be like one of my go-to like sick movies. Like whenever I was sick, I would watch this movie. But yeah, so a comedy most people think is just really dumb and trash, but I really love and is one of my favorite comedies of all time. Land of the Lost.
So this one is kind of going to be a hot take. I just don't like Will Ferrell. Um, now
How
the
dare you?
the other guys is one of my favorite comedies of all time, but he's my least favorite character in it. Um, I, I I I know everybody loves Will Ferrell, but to me, it just always feels like he's like I don't overacting is not the right word, but he just has so much energy in what I would at least consider a bad way. I don't know. It's like he just doesn't really do it for me. I don't find his stuff funny. I'm like the one person who doesn't like Elf. And so I don't know if I'm the best person to talk about this. I don't even know if I saw it. It was 2009, so maybe I saw it. But also, I don't know because my parents don't like Will Ferrell either. So maybe they didn't drag me to see it. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. I apologize. Not a Will Ferrell person, so I can't really comment on this one.
No, I get it. He's got a very specific style that's not going to resonate with everyone. I just particularly find it hilarious. So I'm a huge fan of a lot of his movies, but this is one of the underseen ones. Like most people obviously know like Anchorman, Talladega Nights, the other guys, and those are great. But like Land of the Lost is the one like no one ever talks about. And I think he like just him on his own, like if people do like those other movies, it's just more of that in here. So I don't see why people don't talk about this one more. But yeah, no, I still recommend it. Maybe if you're not a Will Ferrell fan, I don't think this is gonna convince you, but it's still one of my favorite still one of my favorite comedies of all time.
Yeah, that's fair. It's I think I've mentioned this, but there are those movies that I feel like everybody recommends that you have to see if you're a movie fan. And so about a year ago I finally watched Anchorman, and I get it. I get why people liked it. It didn't resonate with me. That's another one. I found all of the side characters hilarious, but I could once again I just couldn't get behind Will Ferrell. And so that, I know it's a hot take. I'm gonna get a lot of hate in the comments, but that's just yeah.
Yeah, I will say just that on that quick tangent, sort of a hot take in the Will Ferrell fan community. I actually don't think Anchorman is that good. Most people, that's like their go-to Will Ferrell movie or like one of their go-to comedies. And even though
Yeah.
I love Will Ferrell, that's honestly, I actually think like objectively that's one of his lesser films personally, but that just seems to be like the go-to for like best Will Ferrell movie, but I personally don't see it.
Yeah, nope,
Talladega
that's
Nights, in my opinion, is way funnier.
and see, and this is bad because like not including the other guys because I like that movie in spite of Will Ferrell. My quote unquote favorite Will Ferrell movie is Kicking and Screaming. I loved that as a kid.
Hey, no, that's a good pick.
That's yeah. But yeah, no, that's okay, cool. So now I don't have a terrible hot take because you agree with me on the Anchorman thing. So my uh my number five is another cheat. However, there is a production company that has made some movies that I personally feel like are very good and are underappreciated. And I couldn't pick just one. So instead, I picked the entire production company. That is Platinum Dunes. For those of you who don't know, this is Michael Bay's production company. In he officially formed it in 2003, and all the movies he's done since have been under this. But like the Bad Boys, as an example, that era, not under this. And I guess also Transformers isn't. He only recently started putting his movies under Platinum Dunes, which I kind of find interesting. But in the early days, all he did was fund the creation of a bunch of horror movie remakes because he's a big horror fan. And that's where this is coming from. So I'm just going to read this list. Nightmare on Elm Street, 14% on Rotten Tomatoes. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 37%. That's the highest. The sequel, 15%. The Hitcher, 19%. Horseman is an original, 17%. Going Back to Friday the 13th, 25%. Amityville Horror, 24%. The Unborn, 12%. That's just from 2003 to 2010 with an average of 20%. That's the year I'm focusing on because after the huge loss that was Nightmare on Elm Street, he decided he was going to change the way he made movies. Then he started doing The Purge, Ouija, A Quiet Place. So people like Platinum Dunes now. But the old Platinum Dunes, the original era, when all they did was focus on horror movie remakes. That's what I'm focusing on here. And what I'm now finding that is interesting, uh, based off of purely Platinum Dunes properties, do you want to take a guess at the one that grossed the most? And this is by a wide margin.
Like out of the horror movies that they've done,
Just all of them. So from 2003 to 2021's The Forever Purge.
I think they did the Turtles movies, didn't they?
They did.
Is it one of them?
It is. It's the first one. This is shocking. It made $485 million. That's insane. Anyway,
Gross.
sorry, I was looking through because none of the horror movies did that. Anyway, going back to what I wanted to talk about. We've alluded to these on earlier podcasts. I know you personally really like Friday the 13th. I know you like A Nightmare on Elm Street. As a Freddy fan, I'm sure you can agree that is a hot take. I feel like the majority of Freddy fans do not like the 2010 remake.
That's
I,
correct.
Ironically, in the Friday the 13th fandom, a lot of people, at least now, do agree that the Friday the 13th movie is one of the best ones. For Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I get it. I know prequels just don't really do well. I get why a lot of people didn't like the sequel. But the first one surprised me because I think 2003 is absolutely amazing. It's a great reboot. I'm surprised that one's rated so low. As I referenced on an earlier podcast, am not necessarily the biggest fan of paranormal stuff, so I can't really speak to the Amityville Horror. I just know it stars Ryan Reynolds. I think I watched it when I was really young, but that's like the ugly stepsister of my list because I like all the other movies. Did you like 2005's Amityville Horror?
Yeah, it was all right. I mean, I know I said that was my least favorite subgenre, sort of like you said, but like I've seen it. I have not even seen the original. I've only seen the remake,
Okay.
and
So
it's all right. It's like 3.5 out of 5.
there you go. Guys, see, that's better than I think it got a 14%. Was that the Oh, nope, 24%. Okay. But the point I'm trying to get at here is as we've seen, a decade plus later, a lot of these movies are at least kind of getting the respect they deserved in my personal opinion. The one I haven't seen is The Hitcher, which is the one I would argue is no, actually, I'm gonna stop myself for saying that. It stands up there with Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and TCM as a really good remake. Um, the okay, I realize that I'm okay. I know that we've kind of talked about F-13. We've talked about Nightmare on Elm Street. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Obviously, it doesn't do what the first movie did. It decides to take a different focus, but I think that Arlie Ermey is cast amazing. I think that the new Leatherface does a really good job. I really enjoy that movie. I actually personally like where it goes with the prequel. I know, like I said, prequels just tend to not do good, especially because you already know what's going to happen. You know that the characters can't die because they were in the first movie, stuff like that. The one that I specifically want to focus on is 2009's Horseman. This stars Daniel. Nope, I am.
Wait,
Yeah, Dennis Quaid. Excuse me. Uh, so he is a detective, and he is hunting down a killer. It's based off the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and the twist. Now, I'm focusing on this one because of all the ones he did. This one did the worst. All the ones he put out because they were big names, they at least ranked in dough. This one did absolutely horrid, and I don't understand it. There are very few movies that like pull at my heartstrings. The twist on this movie is absolutely insane. The twist alone makes it worthy of watching. It's Seven, but done by Michael Bay. I don't know if that sells you or not, but Dennis Quaid is going. It's a drama. It's a thriller. You're going down trying to figure out who's doing it. You're going on this way. You're going that way, and just the twist. I just realized I can't ruin it. So that was why I kind of froze earlier because I was about to give away the twist. But I highly recommend people watch this movie specifically. But of course, I also recommend the other uh, the other the other remakes. And yeah, I apologize that this was not the most cohesive of arguments. I realize that a lot of my notes have been said in prior podcasts, and so yeah. If you're a fan of slashers, I highly recommend the reboots. The Hitcher, once again, is really good. That's the underrated one. And watch Horseman. I still don't understand why this one has a 17%. Dennis Quaid's amazing. The twist is amazing. And yeah, I wish that Michael Bay was still able to helm these movies because there was plans for Freddy vs. Jason reboot. They were going to put Leatherface in it. We were going to get a slasher universe, and it was going to be awesome. And yeah, sorry for this really long ramble, but my number 5 is Platinum Dunes. I think Michael Bay did a much better job than people gave him credit for.
Yeah, just looking through their filmography real quick. Yeah, I love the Texas Chainsaw Massacre reboot. Like I said, the Amityville Horror was pretty good. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the beginning is all right, not nearly as good as the first one. Never seen The Hitcher, never seen The Unborn. Love the Friday the 13th remake. Have not seen Horseman. Love the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. I think the Purge franchise is all right. I've only seen the first. I never saw the Forever Purge. I think the Purge, the Purge Anarchy are really good. Purge Election Year is kind of starting to slip a little bit, and then this first Purge was not that good. Not seen the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies. Have not seen Ouija, but I've seen Ouija Origin of Evil, and that was all right. I thought A Quiet Place, kind of probably hot take. A Quiet Place was all right. It was fine. I don't think it was like this new horror sensation that, everyone was cracking it up to be. I think it was kind of overrated. Never saw Songbird, and then I never saw A Quiet Place Part 2. That's sort of just like my
I
rundown through the Platinum Dunes.
I agree with you. I'll also take your hot take. I did not like A Quiet Place, being perfectly honest. I didn't think it did anything that like blew me out of the water. I absolutely love Songbird. It got a lot of hate because of when it was made and what it touched on, because this was like the first COVID movie, but I actually think it's done extremely well. And real quick, so The Hitcher, the original is Rutger Hauer, C. Thomas Howell, Jennifer Jason Leigh, star-studded. It's this couple. They're going on a trip, and of course, they pick up a hitchhiker, and Rutger Hauer decides that he's just going to mess with these people. And so in the reboot, Zachary Knighton, Sophia Bush, they're the couple. Sean Bean is the hitchhiker. If you know Sean Bean, you know he's an amazing actor. I personally think he does Rutger Hauer justice. A lot of people hate his portrayal. But the entire movie is a bottle story. They're in a car. They stop at a motel, but it's like this road trip from hell essentially. And this was one of my favorites when I was younger. I love the original as well, but I just wanted to give a little more in depth on The Hitcher since you hadn't seen it.
Yeah, a couple of these I definitely want to check out. Like now, I want to check out The Hitcher. I want to check out Horseman. Some point, I'll watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies, just like all of them. But yeah, it'd be cool to watch all the Platinum Dunes movies to do like a ranking.
Yeah, I know that going back and actually looking at this type of stuff, I realized that I think I pretty much like all of the Platinum Dune stuff except for A Quiet Place, but generally speaking, I feel like they haven't had a lot of misses in my opinion.
Yeah, out of the ones I've seen, I've really liked. So there's that.
Yeah.
All right.
And
So
to wrap up, also, as we've said before, Friday the 13th is awesome, and A Nightmare on Elm Street is awesome. And I know that's a hot take, but A Nightmare on Elm Street is awesome.
right, so you have a tie for 20 at fifth place.
Yes.
20-way tie for fifth. Okay.
I cheated.
Yes, I've cheated before. It's fine. So for my number 4, it's already been called out. Godzilla 1998. So this is written by Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich, and they're a duo that's really teamed up for most of Roland Emmerich's movies that Dean Devlin's helped him write. And then it's directed by Roland Emmerich. So a little bit of context. So growing up, first of all, this is a very nostalgic movie for me because I watched this movie a lot growing up. But overall, Godzilla in general is something that's really nostalgic for me because just I watched a lot of different Godzilla movies growing up. This just happened to be one of them, so it sort of just got ingrained into my Godzilla brain growing up. But for this movie specifically, it has a 5.4 out of 10 on IMDb and a 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I believe I'm looking at my numbers now. This is my lowest. This has the lowest Rotten Tomato score on my list. But Essentially, so this came out in 1998, directed by Roland Emmerich. It follows a scientist played by Matthew Broderick who specializes in like the effects of radiation on animals, and he is recruited by the military to help them track down and neutralize a radioactive giant lizard called Godzilla, as the name suggests, or as the Japanese insist he be called Zilla because they don't think he's a real Godzilla. Um, a radioactive giant lizard that has been let loose in New York City. So, most people despise this movie. If you talk to most people, they will talk about how bad this movie is, how cheesy this movie is, how much this movie didn't age well. But I have none of it. I will have none of it because this is one of my most, if I had to pick like a top five most nostalgic movies, this would be one of them because, like I said, I watched it all the time as a kid. I'm a little bit partial to the genre. Like I said, I like disaster movies, I like Godzilla movies. I think that this provides both, and just something in general about me that makes me, I don't want to say more open minded than a lot of other fanboys for things, but I appreciate reboots. And I know that you feel the same way. We've talked already about horror reboots. I appreciate reboots for actually rebooting, not just doing the same thing again. If a movie just does the exact same thing again, I would just watch the original. Why would I watch two of the same thing? So I always appreciate when a reboot takes a concept that I love and reworks it into something else that I could also love. Now, granted, I could also not like how they reworked it, but in a case like this, they changed a lot of things. It's no longer related to Japan. It's now New York City, not Tokyo. Godzilla is a lot more animalistic and lizardy than he is, whereas he's more like an anthropomorphized, intelligent creature. In a lot of the Godzilla things, it's very grounded in the sense that there's not like, aliens and other monsters. He's actually has a root in quote unquote science with like, radiation because he's a marine iguana where there was radiation or there was nuclear testing in the Pacific that mutated him and turned him into this thing. So there's a lot to appreciate here, I think, about the way that they choose to reboot it. And, I like the creature design. I think Godzilla looks really cool in this. He looks more like dinosaur-y, like lizardy. And I know that Toho, the original Japanese creators of Godzilla, like hated this design. Once again, it's different, but it's something that I can respect and appreciate because I think it looks cool as just like a monster design. Um, you know, this is a very cheesy movie, which is often a criticism. But as you and I, I think you more than I, but I do appreciate cheesy sometimes. So I think there's a lot to appreciate about the 90s cheesiness in this. It's sort of just like a big budget sci fi channel movie. And that's what a lot of Roland Emmerich does. But this is like one of the best cases where it's like a big budget sci fi movie and it just makes it all the more enjoyable. Um, I think it has some genuinely good monster action sequences. It was my intro to Gene Reno as an actor, and I think just this is just Emmerich in his sandbox, his like ideal world, excelling at dumb fun, big budget disaster movies. And so yeah, just Godzilla 1998's just been a movie that stuck with me my whole life that I just really don't understand the hate for. Well, I guess I do, because like I said, I think a lot of the hate is just rooted in like hardcore Godzilla lovers who are like, this they changed it up. This isn't Tokyo. He looks like a dinosaur. He's like an animal. He's not like a actual character. And I'm like, yeah, just watch the original. You can lock yourself in a room and watch the original all you want. And it didn't take away the original from you. Just watch, let this be its own thing. And I think you'd like it a lot more. So Godzilla 1998.
I feel like that's gonna be my response now. Whenever somebody says Jacob reboots suck and should never exist, I'm just gonna say it doesn't take anything away from the original. Lock yourself in a room, you can still have it.
Yeah, no one's taking it from you, I promise.
It's funny that this is on your list because so I'm not really like a big Godzilla person. I think we've talked about it before. Godzilla Destroy All Monsters on the GameCube was one of my favorite games as a kid, but I really only played the games. Like I think I watched the movies once when I was a kid, but the reason why I say this is funny is this is my favorite Godzilla movie. Take that from a person who's not like a quote unquote fan of the franchise, but I've seen this movie like 20 times because I loved it so much as a kid. So I'm not in the camp that didn't like this movie. ironically, if it wasn't for the Destroy All Monsters video game, this would be the Godzilla I would think of, and then I would have watched the new movie and went, "What? It doesn't look like the original Godzilla," thinking like 1990 or like my version, I guess I should say, because of course not original. But yeah, I think that's actually kind of funny because I loved this movie. I haven't seen it since I was like in high school, but I loved it back then. I agree. I think it's just fun.
Exactly. And I think it just, like I said, it just refigures the lore and it's a little bit more grounded. He's just a mutated lizard who is not, he's not this like anthropomorphized ancient monster that's been sleeping that has like character traits and things like that. It's just like he's just a monster and a force of nature. And I think that's what Godzilla ultimately, I mean, literally, that's what Godzilla ultimately represents is like the unleashing of nuclear power of like just this monster that's the consequence of nuclear warfare. And I think that while this movie doesn't really capitalize on that theme all too well, it's still kind of present there where he's still just like this force to be reckoned with as a result of, mankind getting involved in nuclear war. So yeah, there's just a lot here that I do appreciate. I'm not saying it's the best. It's not my favorite Godzilla movie. The 2014 one is still my favorite easily. And I think that that's a lot better than this one, but this is still a movie that I'll defend as like a good movie, like a good like 3.5 out of 5 movie.
It's definitely I'm totally gonna get hate for this. I can't help but feel like like what you just said. The justification for the creation of this Godzilla arguably makes more sense, quote unquote. Like you said, of course it's mumbo jumbo science, but it arguably makes more sense than, oh, there's actually a thing in the center of the Earth. I guess actually, I'm sorry. I know what they've been doing in the new movies. Is that the actual basis of the original Godzilla? Because it's been ages since I've seen those movies. Was he like chilling in the Earth?
It has been a while since I've seen the old movies as well. In the original, I think it's that, yeah, he's like a dinosaur basically that got reawakened by the nukes. I could be wrong on that, but my recollection is that he is not like a creature mutated from the radiation.
Okay, coolio. That's my like classic monster movie was always King Kong. I've seen all of them, even the oldest one where it's clearly just a guy chilling in an ape suit. So that like even Kong Skull Island, that one's my favorite of the newer movies. So I'm not the best person to talk about Godzilla.
In my head canon, I used to imagine a Godzilla versus Kong movie where it was this Godzilla and then Peter Jackson's King Kong.
Okay. That actually, I feel like that'd be cool. Um, okay, I did not know this. So there's a Godzilla animated TV series that's based off of this movie. And it looks like
It's a sequel.
it went for 2 seasons, 40 episodes. There you
I
go.
have not
Somebody
seen it.
liked it.
I have I have not seen it because it's one of those where it's like not available anywhere. But I've seen YouTube videos where like people have done like deep dives into like what the episodes were about and like where it took the story.
Oh, it stars Ian Ziering, so obviously it has connections to Sharknado. All right, that's my joke of the
Cinematic universe
podcast.
confirmed.
So moving into my number 4, don't worry, I'm not going to be cheating anymore. Thankfully, I didn't have to cheat for number 4. So one of the things I haven't really touched on in these podcasts, because it's been primarily I love horror, is the fact that my other guilty pleasure subgenre are martial arts movies. I personally, there's not a lot of big blockbusters that revolve around martial arts. Of course, John Wick is like revolutionizing that, but historically speaking, you're not going to see a movie starring a famous martial artist nowadays and have that rank in the dough. It's not like the olden days where like a Jean-Claude Van Damme or a Chuck Norris could destroy the box office. And so a lot of these are B movies. They're filmed on a really low budget and they're just kind of put out direct to DVD and they get found in the community, and that's kind of how that works. There's a guy named Jesse V. Johnson who he likes to work with Scott Adkins, who's my personal favorite martial arts actor, and he works with a lot of other ones, but the movies that they make are awesome. These are the ones that got me into martial arts. I've seen them all a million times. Ones like Accent Man and The Debt Collector, thankfully are rated very highly on Rotten Tomatoes. I didn't have to include them on here. But the one that is my number 4, which is just insane to me because it's not only the one I feel like is the best, it's also my personal favorite, is 2017's Savage Dog. This has a 5 out of 10 on IMDb. So, not like the worst movie I'm going to be talking about, but still, lower than I personally think it should. I feel like this should be, I feel like a lot of the movies in the same vein are like a 7.2 out of 10 if I was to make a guess. So let me just set this up for you. Scott Adkins, Marco Zaror, who's another legend in the martial arts community, Kung Lee, and we even get the voice of Keith David. Who doesn't like Keith David? The president from Rick and Morty. Okay, that's terrible. He's been in a million other things, but I just happened to watch Rick and Morty. So this takes place after World War II, and I think I mentioned this in a previous podcast. I personally really like when movies take historical things and then change them just a little bit. I guess that's technically historical fiction. So this happened, but then the stuff you're actually seeing didn't actually happen. And so in this movie, we are in, let's see here, Indochina, where essentially there are a bunch of war criminals who escaped persecution after the events of World War II. That part is true. There were a lot of people who just ran when the war ended, and then there are stories of people who went around trying to find them and whatnot. None of the people in Savage Dog are based on, or I should say, are real people. So that part is where it then becomes fake. But essentially, we're in this jungle, and there's all these warlords war criminals who are in this group together, and they have all of their stolen money. They have everything they could ever want. They've paid off the police, so they just get to hide there, and there you go. That's like the setup. And they do paid fighting, because of course they do. And so Scott Adkins is just a dude who's wrong place, wrong time. He falls in love with Keith David's daughter. And of course, the war criminals happen to frequent the bar that Keith David owns, messes with the daughter. Scott Adkins doesn't like that. And then, of course, since they have guns, it's either you come and fight for us or we kill you. So we get a lot of awesome fight sequences with Scott Adkins beating people up. And then eventually, since he's like the ringer, he befriends one of the lead war criminals. He is able to see like the doubts between everybody. He breaks up the gang. And then, of course, it ends with him getting one-on-one fights with everybody because it's a martial arts film. And so because of the story itself, take that as you will. It's kind of cut and dry, basic setup. But the fight sequences are what I want to hone on here. If you're a lover of martial arts, a lot of times the martial arts movies will have a character we'll pick an actor, and then that actor, he's done Taekwondo. So all of the martial arts will be Taekwondo, and that's just kind of how it goes. Still perfectly fine. With someone like Scott Adkins, with Marco Zaror, with Kung Lee, these guys are multi-level black belts in multiple different forms of martial arts. So not only is it just them going against each other, you get to see how, based off of the situation, it changes. One person might switch from Taekwondo to Jiu-Jitsu, depending upon whatever, and they all are so good, and they're so well trained that all the fight sequences, obviously it's a movie, but you forget in the moment, and you just get to be fully engulfed. And it's one of those movies that you watch that afterwards you want to go hit a punching bag. And then specifically, the ending fight scene between Scott Adkins and Marco Zaror. Marco Zaror plays like the right-hand man who was the ringer in this fight club, who Scott Adkins becomes better than, and so it's going to be that ending fight because that's how action movies work. It's like a 5-minute fight scene, and it's just awesome. It's hands down the best one that I've seen in all the martial arts movies that I've watched. Which I know, if anybody's a fan, I'm gonna get some hate in the comments because I'm picking that over like The Night Comes for Us, over The Raid, all those Ong Bak, the ones that have the famous fight scenes. But this one, because Scott and Marco are just so good. It's just, yeah. So if you're a martial arts fan, I highly recommend this movie. I know I'm kind of reaching, but it's under 6, so I'm totally counting this because it's one of my favorite movies. It's definitely my favorite martial arts movie, so it has to be on the list. But yeah, this one's really good. I recommend watching it for the fight sequences alone, and the story is not bad.
Yeah, I have never seen this movie. I've never heard of this movie. I am not a martial arts person though, so like most of the names that you dropped and stuff just kind of went right over my head. But yeah, I am not a martial arts person, so I have not heard of this movie. So
It
unfortunately, I don't have too much to say about it.
the moral of the story is start with Savage Dog and then work your way down the entire Jesse V. Johnston collection. Debt Collector is amazing. Accident Man is awesome. Fun fact is you'll know this name. Accident Man actually stars. Uh, uh, Dang it! It's the what? And now I'm drawing a blank. The name of the guy who plays. Um, the name of the guy who plays in the original GI Joe, Ray something. Why is Google not helping me here?
Please who
Ray.
the original?
He's the guy who can't speak, who's like the famous stunt guy.
Oh, Ray Park.
Yes, thank you. Ray
Yeah, Snake
Park,
Eyes.
Michael J. White. They're both in it. They're very good.
Okay.
Um, like he doesn't only they're both famous martial artists, but Michael J. White, of course, has done Spawn and other movies. He's one of the guys who like broke through. And then I think you remember me talking about it. Triple Threat was like the monster movie that put Iko Uwai, Tony Jaa, Scott Adkins, Michael J. White, Tiger Chen, like all of these famous martial artists together. The story is terrible, but seeing all of like the best of like the modern martial arts people, like of course Jet Li, Jackie Chan, those guys exist, but they're much older, and so like seeing all of the modern greats on screen together is worth watching the movie alone.
Right. Well, I will have to not listen to everyone else and take that into consideration then. Okay. So my number three goes hand in hand with what I said about Godzilla 1998, where when there is a reboot, what I'm looking for is for them to take the concept of that original and rework it with new ideas, new context, just shake it up a little bit, give me something new, but with that same general concept. And this is another prime example of something where I think that it does that. It does that, B, it does that well, but most people just can't get over the fact that it's different from the original. So, um, basically from there, 2001, and my favorite movie of all time, the reboot of my favorite movie of all time, Planet of the Apes from 2001.
I thought this would be higher.
It's it just gets a little spicier from here on out. But number three, Planet of the Apes from 2001. So, like I said, if you watch previous videos, Planet of the Apes is not only my favorite classic of all time, it's typically my go to answer for my favorite movie of all time. And so this might surprise you as saying that I defend it because there's almost a one-to-one correlation between people who love the original and people who hate this reboot. But like I said, making a reboot does not take away the original. And I think that this movie specifically, this 2001 reboot of Planet of the Apes, is the perfect example of what I'm looking for in a reboot, in that it takes the original concept but adds some new flavor, some new twists, some new reworking into the mix. So this was directed by Tim Burton and it stars Mark Wahlberg. It's set in the near future when an astronaut, played by Mark Wahlberg, accidentally enters a wormhole that appears in our solar system, and he travels through space and time and appears on an alien planet where apes are the dominant species and humans are their slaves. So, like I said, it's sort of that same general concept about an astronaut time traveling to a planet where apes are superior and humans are subservient. But almost everything else is very different, especially the details. So, for one, I think that this movie has incredible makeup, incredible special effects, incredible costume design on par with the original. Because if you haven't seen it, at least just look it up. The way like these apes look, it's still just as good of practical makeup as the original, in my opinion. If anything, they look a lot more realistic as apes, as chimps and gorillas and orangutans, but it's not CGI. And this coming out in 2001, the CGI would probably look especially atrocious, like a PS2 cutscene, like the Scorpion King. But it looks great. It looks in vein with the original. Like I said, I love the costumes. It comes with new lore. The whole thing is different where it's sort of like the society of apes is sort of reworked where it's like almost more medieval. Like instead of like guns and rifles and pistols, they're using like exclusively like scimitars and spears and plate armor, and they still like ride horses like cavalry and things like that. And the whole society, it's like stone gothic architecture, like it's almost like medieval. So they sort of like really rework what this society looks like. Um, and it's got an amazing supporting cast. You got Chris Christopherson, Michael Clark Duncan, Paul Giamatti, Helena Bonham Carter. Even Charlton Heston actually makes a cameo appearance in it, who most people know as the star of the original. But more than anything, it's got a great movie villain in the form of Tim Roth as General Thade, a chimpanzee general who is basically hates humans and is only concerned with subjugating them and seizing power for himself. So there's just so much to appreciate now about this movie. Now, I will say I think Mark Wahlberg is the weakest link of this own movie, even though he's the star, because I'm not a particularly huge Mark Wahlberg fan. But beyond that, I really like the universe. I like the setting. I like the changes that they made to the lore and the setup. And most people criticize this for the ending. But there's a YouTube video out there that I encourage people to look into that proves that the ending actually makes sense and the twist actually makes sense. And I think that the way that this works, it capitalizes on a lot of the themes about like time that were touched on in the original, about like, being warped, moving so far in the future, or even like in the original novel, there's this idea of like they don't know when or where they are, which you get in the original movie as well. But I just think that the way that this twist works, it sort of plays with that idea of time a lot more than the others did, that the others just touched upon with just like basic time travel. This sort of gets into paradox territory, that I think is just makes it a lot more interesting and a creative angle to go on. So this is a movie where I just think if you are a hardcore Planet of the Apes fan, just put all like I am, just put all the baggage away and just watch it and just learn that there's so much to appreciate here that's not going to touch your original. It still could be not canon if you don't want it to, but just watch it and enjoy it. And I think that there's plenty more that this movie has to offer than most people will consider.
Yeah, so fun fact, if I haven't told you this, Michael Clark Duncan was my favorite actor growing up. And I know I saw this, but it would have been when I was like 6. So this is one that I've had on one of my on pretty close to the top of my list as far as watching, because I know you love this movie and I'm very curious, especially because like you said, anytime I see it referenced, it's because people are hating on the ending. And so I'm generally curious to watch it now. This one of all the ones that we've had, this one I feel like would be on the general public's list of bad movies. So I like that you're defending it. Um, and I'm looking at the cast, and this has a star-studded cast. So I feel like that, like you said, I feel like Mark Wahlberg really would be the wink link, especially given that it's from 2001.
And ironically, though, this is actually, I forgot to mention this. This is my highest rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes. It has a 5.7 out of 10 on IMDb, and it has a 44% on Rotten Tomatoes. So
Hmm.
coincidentally, this is the highest rated on Rotten Tomatoes. But
Is this one of those ones that was terrible when it received terribly when it came out, but over time people are starting to appreciate it?
honestly, I haven't noticed anyone really coming around to appreciate it much. So I think it just didn't do that well. And then just people continued to not like it.
See, I wish that that's what would have happened with The Last Airbender, but apparently people now think that's the best movie ever made. So,
Interest. I've not actually seen that, so I can't comment, but that would be
oh,
interesting.
I can confirm that one is not on my defending bad movies list.
Good. You'd probably be pushed out of the internet.
Man, it's all about the clicks. My next one's Battlefield Earth. No,
Right.
yeah. No, I'm kidding. It's Waterworld. Uh, so my actual at the beginning of when I started ranting about my list, I mentioned that the way I had these ranked is not by my favorites, but by how bad they are perceived in society. I say that because Savage Dog's one of my favorite movies, so you'd think I'd have it higher. But my top three are actual movies that were received terribly by fans or by the public, we'll say, and I love them. And so these are ranked in the order by which I love them, but they're all like socially viewed as bad. And so number three is 2010's Saw 7. You've heard me talk about this a million times. Here's my Planet of the Apes. Uh, I absolutely love the Saw franchise. I think every movie is amazing. I know that in and of itself is a hot take because a lot of people do not like the Hoffman set of movies after the original trilogy. It seems like there's a general dislike for those movies, but I still personally love them. I think they all have redeeming qualities. But specifically Saw 7, the one that I see get the most hate. Here are my things. Here are my notes. First, in my personal opinion, I think this has the best cold open. I think that the kill with the two best friends who have been seeing the same woman, and the fact that it's in public with all the people watching and they are given the control. Like, I get that. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Everybody's given the control in traps, but like this one, the public aspect and all the other parameters around it, to me, really like raise the gravity. And I've always loved this cold open. I think it sets the scene perfectly for the movie. Two, my personal favorite kill in the entire Saw franchise is in this movie. It's the one with Chester Bennington. I should have said spoilers at the beginning because I'm going to be talking about a lot of murder. There's a scene where Chester Bennington is super glued in a car to where he has to peel his skin off of the back seat in order to be able to stop the car before the spinning wheel drops onto the face of his girlfriend, then drives into a wall, thus pulling the jaw out of his best friend who's behind him attached to the car. Of course he fails, and what follows is just epic. I know that sounds weird, but I absolutely love that kill. That's still my favorite to this day in the entire franchise. The way that it plays out, the fact that Chester Bennington is in it, R.I.P. of course, and just the way that, yeah. Next, everybody hates this ending. This really is my Planet of the Apes. But in my personal opinion, thinking about everything throughout the movie, I absolutely love it. I won't spoil this. But the way it ends, I think, actually ties everything together. I think it makes so much sense because it fills a lot of holes that if you really thought hard about the last 6 movies, now all of a sudden it all makes sense. I also think it makes perfect sense going back to the movie that it's a twist off of. I'm going to try and talk about this without spoiling stuff. And I personally just really like it. I like the idea that throughout a couple different movies, this was the thing. I think that adds an extra layer. I think one of the reasons why I really love this entire franchise is the philosophical debates that it causes, and I think that this one just adds a whole extra layer to one of the main themes of the original trilogy, and so that I love. I love the way that it ends for a certain character. Also, my final point, for 7 movies, we have waited to see the reverse bear trap actually kill somebody. And we finally get to see it happen. In all the other movies, it was either done off screen or people escaped. And so this is the one movie where we finally get to see the thing we've all been waiting for. And it, in my opinion, lives up to every second of build-up, where we finally get to see the reverse bear trap go off. Also, like I mentioned earlier, I personally really like Mark Hoffman. I like Costas Mandylor. I like his character arc over his set of movies, and so I know that's a main reason why a lot of people don't like this movie, but I personally like him, so that already counteracts that main argument. But yeah, those are my main points. Best cold open in my opinion, Best kill in the entire franchise, is my opinion. I personally really like the twist, and I am so happy that we finally got to see the reverse bear trap actually go off and kill somebody.
Okay, now this is interesting because I think I've said before, Saw is one of my favorite horror franchises of all time. I will say that Saw 7 is my least favorite in the entire franchise. That
Yep,
being
I knew that,
said,
and that's why I figured this would be fun coming into this.
I think I still gave it like I believe I gave it like a 2.5. So to me, that's like the middle of the road, like just fine. So I wouldn't say it's even bad either. So in a
if
sense, I agree. It's not terrible. A lot of people would probably give it a lot lower. To me,
if
this
I
is
didn't
still
say
my
it has a
bottom.
9% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Then there you go. Yeah, exactly. Most people don't like that. Don't like this movie, but I still like it a good bit. I mean, it's just like you said, yeah, I guess I just have more problems with it. I think on paper, I really love the story. Like the whole idea of like, a guy who's making up being a jigsaw survivor, actually having to
Oh,
go through it.
I didn't even talk about that. I was so focused on the points, I totally forgot about the guy who's actually going to the traps. Yes, you are correct.
Right.
I really enjoy that as well, and I'll let you continue. I'm sorry. That's just wow. How did I blank on that?
No, you're fine. Just like the guy in the traps, he's for those who don't know, he is a guy who has made a bunch of money and gotten a lot of publicity off of, writing about his harrowing encounter as a jigsaw survivor, but he's lying and he's making it up for clout. And so Hoffman puts him through an actual, jigsaw tr- uh, trial, basically, to as punishment, basically, for him lying. So, yeah, I just think on paper that's a really cool concept. The movie's execution, and like you said, it's got wicked traps. I'll give you that. This was definitely the height of when they're just like, we just need traps. That's what people come to this movie for, is traps. And so they just tried to go like above and beyond, putting as much grody traps in there as possible.
Uh, Real quick, going off of that. Thank you for reminding me of this. As far as severity or empathy for a trap, the ending where the person you're talking about is so close to completing his task, and then at the last second it doesn't work, and then the pig comes up. I feel like that pig trap is also a really great trap, but that moment is just like, oh my god, no, he was so close.
No, I mean the traps are done well. All the traps I think are done well in all these movies. Just the story for this one didn't really tie me together. Like the big twist at the end, I was like, okay, kind of telescoped that from the beginning. Saw has this Saw has this tendency to just correct plot holes in previous movies by making them twists in future sequels. And so I think that this is probably the worst offender of that, where it feels like they only shoehorned this in. I'll give them credit for wanting an actual continuity, but you can definitely tell when watching these future movies that they're just like, we got to cover up that plot hole, so let's add something in and just say that this was this way all along.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I don't know if I can really argue with that. And this is also where I guess I should note, if I haven't said this before. So, um, I can just straight up say this is my favorite horror franchise. Like I said, I personally think all of these movies are absolutely amazing. There is not one movie that I dislike. Part of that is because when I was either a sophomore or junior, I got pneumonia and was out of school for an entire week, and I decided to binge all of Saw 1 through 7 in a row because I had never seen it before. So I think part of the reason why I like it so much is because, unlike the normal people who had to like wait time to see the sequels, I watched them all back to back, and they all do a really good job of picking up exactly where the previous one left off. And so everything flows really well together. So it feels like you're watching one giant movie. And with us going to see Jigsaw, seeing Spiral later, even with Saw X, when I'm seeing these movies in theaters, they're like good, but they're not resonating as well. Then when I do my rewatch and watch them all in a row, all of a sudden they're amazing. And I think this is just a franchise that works very well together, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. I get that. I didn't watch any of them in theaters until Jigsaw either.
Ah, all right. There we go.
So, okay. My number two is one that I put at number two. It's not necessarily that I'm just particularly passionate about defending this movie per se, but it's just a movie that came out this year, relatively recently, that just got universally panned and thrown through the gutter, and I felt like I had to defend and had some little defenses going on Twitter about this. Um, so basically, it's from last
Excuse me.
month in October, um,
Five Nights at Freddy's.
2023's. No, that one is all right. I will defend that one a little bit, but this is the Exorcist Believer.
Ah,
So this was written by Peter Sattler and David Gordon Green, and it was directed by David Gordon Green. Most people know him as the writer-director for the Halloween H40 trilogy that Blumhouse put out: Halloween, Halloween Kills, and Halloween Ends. And like with the Halloween trilogy, the Halloween H40 trilogy, Danny McBride also helped work on the story for this one. But this is a legacy sequel to the original Exorcist. So, for those who might not be familiar with that term, basically it just, in continuity, it picks up not right where the original left off. It's like 50 years later because the original took place in 1973. But basically, all the Exorcist sequels that had come out in between the original and this one just didn't happen canonically. So, the events of the first one happened, 50 years happened, and then now this one happened. So it stars Leslie Odom Jr. as a single father who basically has to battle this spiritual evil when his daughter and her best friend go missing in the woods for 3 days and they return possessed. So this movie got dragged through the gutter. It just, everyone was hating on it. People were calling it one of the worst movies they'd seen all year. Some people saying one of the worst movies they'd seen, period. Other people were saying it's one of the worst horror movies they'd ever seen. I don't know if it was necessarily hearing that going in that changed my perception, but I came out of this movie giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars and giving it like an actual like on Letterboxd because I didn't think this movie was bad at all. Um, I'm sort of just going to go through what I wrote on Letterboxd because I wrote like a huge rant in Letterboxd about this.
okay.
But before I do that, just a little context. I've seen the first Exorcist a couple times. I'm not a huge fan of it. Supernatural possession stuff is my least favorite subgenre, and that's like the king of the possession movies, obviously. But not necessarily I don't dislike the original. It's just not nearly my favorite. I respect it. I have not seen any of the sequels, so this was the first sequel, I guess, that I had seen. Um, but yeah, never seen any of the ones in the middle, and I like the first one enough, and I respect it a lot, and that was my experience going into this one. So, I think that this movie feels like multiple different good movies fighting for screen time, and that was ultimately the fault in this movie. So the way this movie starts off, it's like Leslie Odom Jr. is a single father because his wife, when they were pregnant with his daughter, she ends up dying. The baby's born, and he has to care for her. And his wife died in this natural disaster. She actually died in the 2010 Haiti earthquake because they were in Haiti at the time. But so the whole movie, it's just about him being this super protective single father who is super protective of his daughter because of what happened with his mother, where he was her mother, where he was helpless to save her from just, the consequence of just living in the world, like an earthquake. You can't prevent an earthquake. You can't, whatever. So he feels like he has to be super protective of her. And when she goes missing and comes back possessed, it's like he's dealing with a new level of something to protect her from. That's on a spiritual level that's way beyond anything physical. And so for me, just on paper, that's such an interesting concept. And I actually think that this movie does it well because it started off very solid and it had a very strong kickoff, a very strong first act. And I was actually really invested in Leslie Odom Jr.'s character and his relationship with his daughter because I think that if this movie was just about a single father dealing with the disappearance of his daughter and reappearance of his daughter, it would have been great without needing to bring in all the possession stuff. But that being said, I think the way that it tied in initially to the legacy of the original felt very natural, and it was a very interesting direction for a legacy sequel. It did end up going off the rails and it went a little too far with those ideas, but I at least think the general setup was promising. It didn't feel particularly hokey to me, like, oh, they're just scraping the bottom of the barrel to get more name recognition. I think it did start to sort of drop off by like the middle point, especially, I hate to say it for a possession movie, but the more it got into the possession stuff, I think was the weakest stuff. But it did maintain a lot of that really good family drama stuff that I really liked with Leslie Odom Jr.'s character and his daughter, because I just found that really compelling. I don't think this necessarily had to tie into The Exorcist specifically. It could have been just like some other possession movie. Because, like I said, it's such an interesting and compelling idea that he wants to protect her from everything, and she ends up getting possessed. So that's like the one thing he like can't protect her from, because that's like a whole other level of things to be able to protect her from, like spiritually. Not to mention he also pretty much lost any faith he had when his wife was killed. So he doesn't really believe in supernatural stuff like that. But all that being said, I still just enjoyed that relationship, and I thought that was a very compelling angle, even if I didn't necessarily care as much for like the actual possession stuff. I thought the finale had a couple good twists. Um, it definitely had plenty of possession tropes and cliches. Wasn't necessarily, too original or bringing anything new to the genre, but I didn't think anything in it was overly offensive either. At best, it was just same old, or at worst, it was just same old, same old. Um, and I actually was really surprised at David Gordon Green's direction here, because even though I like the first Halloween movie that he did and didn't really care as much for the sequels, the main theme in all of those was that him being a comedy director, he would just like sometimes he just handled things immaturely, I guess I would say, where he would just inject this like really weird raunchy humor that like didn't fit the tone at all. And I really hate that in movies in general, but I thought that in those Halloween movies, they were especially offensive, like getting peanut butter on your penis in Halloween 2018 is my go-to example of just a dumb joke that had no business being there. But this was actually a really mature movie. Like there wasn't really any jokes. There weren't any like, one-liners, there weren't any dumb humor, and I really think David Gordon Green matured as a director, but be a horror director, because even though the horror sequences weren't anything like original or groundbreaking, it looked like David Gordon Green had gotten a lot better at directing horror sequences than I'd say he did in the Halloween trilogy. So basically, all that to say, not nearly as bad as anyone said. Was it perfect? Of course not. Was it great? No. Was it the best version of a legacy sequel to The Exorcist? Not quite. But still, I concluded that it was solid, inoffensive, and it contained a lot of good ideas, even if it was along with the so-so ones. So, The Exorcist Believer, and I forgot to mention it has a 22% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 4.9 out of 10 on IMDb. It really got review bombed, like people just giving it like 1 star for like no reason other than hating on it. So, not really a fair score, but take it or leave it.
Yeah, so this my mom loves the original. She actually is someone who likes the sequels as well, and so we were gonna go see this, and then it just didn't work out. Once it comes on to like an HBO or something, although I would assume it's gonna go to Peacock, right?
Yes, yeah, and it's got 2 sequels coming that are both gonna be straight to Peacock.
So yeah,
This was the only
eventually.
theatrical movie.
Didn't you say they spent like 500 million on the IP and they're only doing this one theatrically?
They spent 400 Blumhouse spent 400 million just to get the rights to do The Exorcist, and then proceeded to make this film with its budget and its marketing budget, and make 2 other movies, but only release this one in theaters. So, very baffling financial choice, but nevertheless, I dug this one enough that I'm excited to see where it goes.
Okay, just curious. Yeah, I can't. I haven't seen this one, so I can't really speak on it. But yeah, I honestly didn't expect any really recent movies to be on your list. So this one's surprising.
This was just one I just had to be defending this past couple months on Twitter, or this past month or so on Twitter. So it was like fresh. I just felt like I had to just get it out there that this is a good movie and don't hate on it.
So what you're saying is, if anybody wants to argue with you on Twitter, they know where, or if anyone wants to argue with you, they know where to find you.
Exactly. Yes.
Um, All right. Well, yeah, that's that one's a cool pick. I'm definitely interested since you put that at number 2, so that makes me a little more excited for the movie. My number 2 is going to be a little bit of a speed run because I talked about this in a previous podcast. It has a 19% on Rotten Tomatoes. It is the most hated movie in the Friday the 13th franchise, Jason X. I'm just going to do a quick rundown of what I said before. This is not a good movie. This is a fun movie. This is fan fodder to the max. If you are a fan of Jason, if you are a fan of Friday the 13th, you will enjoy this movie. Just sit back and enjoy the ride. They weren't trying to make this a good movie. They knew what they were doing. It's Jason in space, for God's sakes. This is one that I'm going to forever go to my grave defending. It's just that everybody watches it expecting it to be like, I don't know, Breakfast Club. It's not. And so you get cybernetic Jason, who looks cool as heck, doing some of the coolest special effects kills. The one I mentioned in the previous podcast is the famous one where the woman's head gets frozen in the nitrate and then smashed on the countertop. And then also, there's so many amazing callbacks to the franchise that you can just tell it's amazing. Like this whole movie was made to be fan service. It was taking way too long for Freddy versus Jason. They wanted to pop out another one. I really enjoy this movie. It's very fun. It's an hour and a half. It goes by super quickly. And KM, played by Lisa Ryder, I think universally a lot of people agree is one of the best horror movie characters that's like not a final girl. I remember when we filmed the last podcast, I had just seen a video that had put her like number 3, and I wanted to follow up on that, and I've looked at a lot of other lists now. So at least she gets the respect she deserves because she's arguably the best character in the entire franchise besides Jason. She's just awesome. Whoever wrote her character deserves money. but yeah, the moral of the story is this is a fun movie, especially if you enjoy Jason, and I highly recommend it. Don't just not watch it because everybody says this is trash.
Yeah, so like I had said when this was discussed before, not a huge Jason fan, not a huge Friday the 13th fan. I particularly didn't like it when it started to go that goofier direction. So it might take me a little bit to warm up to something like this, but I have not seen this one actually. So like I said, I've only seen 1 through 6. So I will be checking out these later sequels, I guess, at some point, and Jason X included. But I will say I have seen a lot of like diehard Friday the 13th fans agree with you and be like, it's just more of what we like. So I do have to agree that at least it appears as if this is something that is definitely very underrated.
The other thing I'll add off of that, I don't normally like sci-fi movies. This is a very good sci-fi movie. They do a lot of what you were talking about where it's just science mumbo jumbo that makes no sense. David Cronenberg is the main person who's like, well, this is because the Jim Bops were in the. I'm not gonna try, but it's just funny. At the end of the day, even though it's a horror movie, there's comedy, there's action. It's just a fun movie.
Right, definitely. Maybe spooky season next year. I'll actually finish off the Friday the 13th franchise and get to watch this. So, okay, my number one quote unquote bad movie that I will defend. This is a movie that I will defend in the face of death, that I will defend to the grave, that I have been defending for nearly 7 years now. And if anyone knows me in real life and knows my film opinions, this is probably my most notorious hot take. And it's in a lot of my things. I think it's in my Letterboxd bio. Might be in my Twitter bio. It's at least in my Letterboxd bio. That this movie is an absolute masterpiece. 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10. You know what? 11 out of 10. Masterpiece that I will continue to defend. So, so this was the only one where there was a split. On IMDb, it has a 6.5 out of 10, but on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 29%. But being in film discourse, especially on film Twitter, this is commonly a very overhated movie. So this is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, 2016, written by Chris Terrio, who brought us Argo and Zack Snyder's Justice scripts for Argo and Zack Snyder's Justice League. Also co-written with David S. Goyer, who gave us Blade 2, Batman Begins, Man of Steel, and directed by the man Zack Snyder himself, who gave us 300, Watchmen, and Man of Steel up to this point. So, Batman v Superman kicks off in the wake of the events of Man of Steel, where the world is at a crossroads on how it feels about having Superman as a new hero on Earth, having made his very, very public debut. Meanwhile, the criminal mastermind Lex Luthor is manipulating both Superman and the Dark Knight himself, played by Ben Affleck, to basically kill each other for his own nefarious purposes and pitting them against each other. There's so much I can say from this movie. I'm going to try my hardest to be concise and not just completely rant for hours.
Hey,
But
I did it earlier. Go to town.
there are just so many things of this that I can just say are incredible that Zack Snyder did. I will start by saying that Ben Affleck is my favorite live action Batman. Uh, I had alluded in a previous podcast where we talked about, I believe it was overrated movies, and I talked about The Dark Knight at my number one. I pointed out all my problems with Christian Bale's version of Batman, and all of these are resolved in Batman v Superman. What I love about the Batman character, once again, I'm not saying that this is how he always is in the comics. I'm not saying this is his main characteristic in the comics, but I'm saying that I like this characteristic of him the most. And when the character has these primary characteristics, but it's that insatiable, you know, thirst for vengeance and justice, where everything else in his life be damned. He's going to do nothing but just be self propelled by the trauma of his parents' murder to fight crime and exact vengeance. And this Batman that we have in Ben Affleck here, where he's been in it for 20 years, he's 45, he's grizzled, he's rough around the edges. He's just stopped caring about anything but just beating up criminals. And to me, that's exactly where I like my Batman. I think I find that so compelling. And I find that most interesting about the Bruce Wayne character, where even when he's Bruce Wayne in this movie, he's never turning Batman off because he can't turn Batman off. Everything in his life, Alfred even makes jokes about this in this movie about how he's never going to get a wife, he's never going to have kids because he's just honed in on this mission, which is to kill Superman because he views him as a threat. That being said, on the other side of this coin, Zack Snyder did the impossible and made me love Superman. Superman historically was one of my least favorite comic book characters because I found him to be super boring. I understand in all the different comics he has different, problems, this and that. Overall, there's no denying he's typically just the red, white, and blue Boy Scout who is, not saying he doesn't have flaws, not saying he doesn't have an edge sometimes, but he's typically known for being the embodiment of hope and justice and, stuff like that. But what Zack Snyder did, especially in Man of Steel leading into this one, I found relatable, where he actually made Superman relatable. You think about being this superpowered godlike being, your planet's destroyed, your dad's dead. It sort of makes sense that he would be like a loner and a drifter, not sure where he belongs in this world. And now that he's been known and outed as Superman, as this messiah figure, and the world, seems to somewhat reject him because they're afraid of him, how does that make him feel? Probably not very good. So he's probably not the happiest little paragon of virtue right here. He's a little bit depressed. He's not sure where he fits in. He's not sure if what he's doing is the right thing. I find that compelling and interesting, and it gives Superman a depth that was realized in this interpretation more so than any other medium that I've seen Superman in. So it made me actually like the Superman character. But all that to say, what I find most compelling, and most people say that Zack Snyder didn't understand Superman because Superman's supposed to be about hope, whatnot, blah, 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 blah. I think you actually do see this here more than any other interpretation because he's this alien from another planet. Earth is not his home. He doesn't need to be Superman. He doesn't need to be whatever. but he still brings out the humanity in Batman. Yes, everyone always craps on the Martha scene, but when you really think about it, what happens in the Martha scene and what happens afterwards, you have the actual human, the human being who is supposed to be representing justice in this world, who's gone so far he's lost his humanity, but he rediscovers his humanity because of this alien who's calling out to save his mother. And that makes him realize that this, what he thought was this cold, heartless, calculating alien that was a threat, actually cares about something and actually has a heart. And it just utterly contrasts with how he lacks any of that. So to make Superman this figure that would make even a human being, inhuman by comparison, I think that's Zack Snyder totally getting it right. And that's what I find makes it one of the best, actually the best Superman interpretation that I had seen. So already, you just have two of the best interpretations of two iconic comic book characters put together in this movie, just throwing in some other things into the mix. I actually really like Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor. That is a super hot take, but you got to think about what they were going for. It's a modern Lex Luthor. The age of you know, old 70-year-old oil barons in suits is over. This movie's in 2016. What's the billionaire now? Quirky, eccentric, tech billionaires, young. Basically, I mean, Jesse Eisenberg played Mark Zuckerberg. He's basically like a Mark Zuckerberg, a really quirky, sort of annoying tech billionaire. He's got some weird ticks, but like to me, I'm like, that just makes sense. It's like an updating of Lex Luthor to the modern age. Even if you want to get super particular, he's Lex Luthor Jr. His dad was the big bald Lex that we know and love. But just, and then you got to think, his character, his motivation, it all sort of fits. If you watch the Ultimate Edition of this movie, his plan actually makes sense. The theatrical edition decided to cut like instrumental parts of his plan. It really just brings to life the Lex Luthor from the comics, where he thinks he's the god, and he's threatened by the existence of these super beings like Batman and Superman specifically, where he doesn't like feeling that inferiority, and he has this really harebrained scheme, but it actually kind of fits. It actually kind of makes sense, especially in that Ultimate Edition. All the pieces fall into place, and you can see how complicated of a plan it was, but it all comes to fruition. And that's sort of what I'm looking for in like a Lex Luthor figure, where he feels so threatened, he feels so inferior, he can't let it's a bruise to his ego that Superman even exists, and he knows he can't beat him in a hand-to-hand fight, of course. So he has to organize this elaborate scheme in order for this to happen, and it's pulled off well. And just all of that combined with everything. I mean, Amy Adams is great. Diane Lane is great. Even Gal Gadot's intro as Wonder Woman is epic. I listen to this soundtrack is incredible. It's one of my favorite movie soundtracks of all time. I listen to it all the time, especially the Wonder Woman theme that I really love. The Wonder Woman theme might be one of my favorite pieces of movie score. And that entrance she has where that music plays is incredible. So yeah, so just overall, this is just an incredible comic book movie project that really brings these characters to life in the modern era, and I think really deconstructs these characters in the best way possible. And I think that Zack Snyder did that so well because his whole thesis of the DC universe was supposed to be deconstructing these heroes. And Zack Snyder loves to play with this idea of like mythology, where these like superheroes are like mythology, where they represent like the gods of the modern day. And he really makes these characters feel like mythical figures in these realities. So overall, I love Zack Snyder's vision for this. I love Batman v Superman. I love Man of Steel. I love his Justice League. And I really wish we could have seen his whole universe come to fruition. But this one gets hated on the most because people tend to like Man of Steel and tend to like Zack Snyder's Justice League. This one, like I said, you have to watch the Ultimate Edition. It's 3 hours. You can buckle in, but it's worth it. Absolute masterpiece. Absolute masterpiece. But anyway, I will defend this to the death. Bad, quote unquote, bad movies, I will defend to the death. BVS.
So I will say, when we first met, I was definitely in the camp who did not like this movie. I had seen the theatrical version, and I pretty much left with a bad taste in my mouth. You are correct. Once you watch the extended version, the Ultimate Edition, it's much better. The extra 30 minutes makes all the difference. Also, as I was older watching it, I liked it a lot more. Um, I understand both sides. I understand the people who really like Zack Snyder's vision. I understand the people who don't. I really think it just depends upon whether you like people who I think it kind of goes back to the reboot discussion where do you want someone to take something you love and do something new with it, or do you just want to see a copy of the same old thing? And so, people will make the argument, like you said, that this isn't a comic accurate adaptation. And for some people, that's okay. And for others, it's not. And so that's the one thing that's the most interesting when I hear people talk about this movie in particular, like you said. For me personally, Man of Steel is my personal favorite. That one's my favorite DCU movie. I know that it's not a high bar because the DCEU is what it is. This one's very close behind it. I think I have more issues with it, but it's not necessary. So, like for me personally, and this, I think I still gave it like a 4 out of 5 on. So like I still rated it highly. For me personally, I still think that as far as the world building and the way so just in the context of the movie, I agree with you. I think the Batman's cool. I think the Superman is cool in the context. So like I was talking about, could it be more comic book accurate? Yes. Do I care? No. Go ahead, have fun with it. In the context of the Snyderverse, I would have loved for none of that stuff to happen and for us to get the Zack Snyder Wonder Woman and all the other stuff he had planned for Green Lantern and Cyborg. So in the context of the movie and what his vision was, totally on board. The part I didn't like, I still personally think that he tried to shove too much in one movie. I liked the Batman versus Superman with Lex Luthor aspect. I thought adding in Wonder Woman and adding in Doomsday and all the extra stuff personally for me kind of like I don't want to say ruins it at the end because like I said I still gave it like a 4 out of 5, maybe even a 4.5 out of 5. It's been a while since I've seen the Ultimate Edition, but I remember not hating it. And so yeah, but the one I do specific that's like my one qualm with it. I think he tried to jam a lot into the movie, so that's the only thing I'd say. But yeah, I definitely you won me over once I watched the Ultimate Edition. But I definitely did not like the theatrical version. I have very vivid memories of being pissed off because I was so excited for this movie in 2016.
Yeah, it's if you chart the history of this movie, it sort of touches on what you're saying, they're cramming too much in, which I definitely get. Like, it started originally as just a straightforward Man of Steel 2 with Henry Cavill fighting. I think, like, originally they were gonna have, like, Brainiac or something. And then they decided to shift gears and introduce make Lex Luthor the villain, and then they started to shift gears, and they're like, "Well, let's why don't we put Batman in there? And then why don't we put Wonder Woman in there?" And then they're like, "Well, why don't we, we're trying to get this Justice League movie out, so why don't we make it more about Batman?" And it just kind of devolved into this. So not saying that this is inferior, but the other the chart of its history is actually pretty interesting.
I won't. I'm not with you dying on the hill that this is like the perfect movie, but what I will die on the hill on is that Warner Brothers interfered with something that could have been amazing. I think that the original Snyderverse that he had planned had the makings of something that would have rivaled the MCU, arguably could have been better than the MCU, and like Warner Brothers always does, they meddled, and they meddled too much, and, cool. James Gunn's got this. I'm hoping for the best. But that's what I'll die on the hill on. I think that Snyder, once again, is it comic book accurate? No. But would it have been cool? I think so. And so, knowing him, knowing his vision, I think that that's something that is going to be one of the biggest what ifs. I really just wish that we could have gotten to see his full vision from start to finish.
And I also just really hope I think it would be really interesting if we ever got, like, a book in the near, like, 5, 10 years of, like, chronicling the behind the scenes of how all this went down with him and, like, his Justice League movie and everything. I think that'd be really interesting to explore.
The thing that is cool is so of course we got the Snyder cut finally of Justice League, and it's a part one of a trilogy. And they did announce that the second two movies are going to be made into comics. This was, of course, back in I think it was 2021 when we got the Snyder cut. So maybe they've already been making those comics. I have been slacking in the comic scene, but you are going to get to see at least that trilogy fully unfold, which is nice. But yeah, we've had so many conflicting stories on what happened behind the scenes. So I'd love like a telltale documentary in sports. ESPN always does a 30 for 30 on like the most random stuff that goes behind the scenes on things we all wanted to know about. So I'm going to call it the movie version of the 30 for 30. I'd love to know what truly went on. Be a fly on the wall of the Zack Snyder behind the scenes.
Sure, maybe one day, but I just think that'd be really interesting. So
Well, kind of in the same vein as you, because I know how much you love this movie. When I was making this list, I was trying to think of what are bad movies that I like. Then, once we decided the parameters, I was just curious, so I started typing in my favorite movies. And I was absolutely shocked to find out that my favorite movie of all time, in this current moment, of course, that could change down the line, but it's been my favorite movie for a solid 4 years now, ever since I first saw it. I've seen this movie 50 times probably. It has a 37% on Rotten Tomatoes. So is it the worst one I've defended today? No. I think Saw is with 9%. Saw 7 is with 9%. But it's 2008's Rambo. You know how much I love this movie. I am now going to mini rant. This is Sylvester Stallone's magnum opus. He had had his hand in the cookie jar on other movies before, but this is the one he wrote, he directed, and he starred in from start to finish. He took a decade plus mastering this movie, making sure that the story was as perfect as it could be, crafting the most perfect action sequences that would make Rambo fans jump for joy. And what he ends up creating, in my opinion, is definitely a masterpiece. Similar to what you said with BVS, you have to watch the director's cut. The theatrical version was the production company saying, "You have too much story. We need you to cut about about a half hour, so that way we can just have all action in the theater." And so I have a feeling that's why it has a 37% on Rotten Tomatoes. But when you add in the extra, I think it's 18-ish minutes, everything just all of a sudden is that much better. You get all of the behind the scenes story, the character building, the empathy. Like so the setup is John Rambo is completely retired. He's just chilling in a jungle in Burma, completely content living out the rest of his life after the events of the first 3 movies. He's old, he's retired, he's done his due, and he is ready to go into pasture. There is a missionary troop who is trying to bring aid to a village in Burma. This takes place in 2008. If you remember, there was a lot of stuff going on over there, and so Sylvester Stallone specifically wanted to make commentary on that. And they are told by the locals that Rambo has a boat and that he can take them into Burma. He says, "You're insane. No one goes there. There are crazy people there who will murder you." But of course, they don't listen. They still want to go. And Julie Benz is like the other main character. She's I don't want to say love interest because there's nothing that happens between Rambo and Julie Benz, but you can tell there's like a connection. I would almost argue it's more like father-daughter. And this is part of that 18 minutes they add. She comes back. She tells her story. He tells his story. They have like this intense moment in the rain where they're both like it's pouring down. It's totally cliche, but it's pouring down rain, and they're like they're showing their hearts to each other, putting them on their sleeve, and then he's like, "All right, fine, I'll bring you up the river," and that's what sets off everything. You know what? No, I am going to go into it because I want to go ahead and tackle some of the themes and why this movie is so much more than the sum of its parts. So we talked about this when I covered Rambo First Blood. The original movie is based off of a book that is heralded as one of the best books of its time. It was one of the first books to talk about the treatment of military veterans when they come home and about the battle on our own soil. And of course, the movie, while it was changed a lot to still be more appealing to the wider audience, it also tries and tackles those themes. So 2 and 3 don't really do that. They're stereotypical action blockbusters. With number 4, he wanted to bring back themes. He wanted there to be things for you to think about. And so we're going to start to see what some of the themes are in this movie. As they're going down the river, there are pirates who take over his boat, and they're about to do very bad things to the passengers. So Rambo kills them. The missionary leader gets so pissed off at Rambo. He's like, "Who are you? Don't have any right to do that. Who are you to decide whether they should live or die?" And he says, "Well, it was either I kill them or they kill you." And so it sets off this entire thing of like the moral dilemma of the rights and wrongs of death, and it starts making you think about the different situations when it would be even okay to take a life. And it's not even of course the missionary group, they end up in Burma, they're treating the village, it gets raided by the war criminals, and they get captured. Rambo has to go back. There's all these mercenaries. They do this. They add in more stuff where the mercenaries are all young and they're buff and they're like, oh, we could eat 10 people for breakfast. And Rambo's this old guy, and of course there has to be that correlation of, oh well, old guys can't do anything. And then of course Rambo's the one who's the best out of all of them because he's been doing it the longest and he's this hardened war vet, and it's always inside of you. And there's one of the best lines that I still love to this day. There's this guy who's like ready to quit once he sees the shit that they've gotten themselves into, and Rambo is like, "You either live for nothing or you die for something." And that's just like, oh, such a good line. It's delivered so much better in the movie. It's just like you're at the edge of your seat, you're fully engulfed. Every second is like, oh my god, what's going to happen next? And I love the ending sequence. The action's great. They still follow the general action formula, so it's like the bad guys get into something, there's a climax, it looks like that everybody's, all is lost, but then of course they end up winning, and it's like, oh, how do they do it? And it's just so epic. It's like the years of Stallone doing action movies, he knew what would speak to fans, to the audience. And I will say Google gave this an 85%. So Google users know what they're talking about. It's the Rotten Tomato people who don't know. And so yeah, I'll go ahead and stop. I was going to go through the entire movie, but we're not going to do that. But this is just when I'm feeling down and low, I watch this movie and I am immediately happy again. It is amazing. I could watch this a million times over. This is definitely my favorite movie of all time at my current moment. And it's insane that it came out in 2008 and I only saw it for the first time in 2019. But I had heard that all the sequels to First Blood were terrible, so never watched them. And then Last Blood came out and I decided to just do them all. And I'm so glad I did. This movie is awesome.
Yeah, I have only seen First Blood. I have the Blu-ray collection of all 5 movies, including Last Blood, but I do plan on watching this series all at some point because you've talked about it so much. It's one of your favorites, and so I have to check it out. And yeah, this is one where just like the discourse I have heard, this one particular Rambo 2008 seems to be like the one that most people are coming around to more. I think, I hear it talked about more positively than I feel like it did when it came out. So yeah, I can't personally attest to that, but that seems to be like what you're saying seems to be a little bit more of a general vibe from what I hear from at least Rambo fans now.
From what I can gather from doing research, it looks like one, it was the theatrical version that was way more emphasis into the action, and so it just was like the another stereotypical blockbuster. And also he specifically made this movie to talk about the state of the world, and so some people don't like when Hollywood gets political and all that jazz, and so I think that probably turned off some people with what was going on in Burma and all that jazz. But the one thing I will say is it is really hard to actually find the director's cut. I got super lucky in that Max sometimes will have both versions, and so I was able to watch the director's cut first, because whenever I see director's cut, I always watch that over the theatrical version. In my opinion, 99% of the time, the director's vision is better, so I will watch the director's cut. But then when I wanted to own this movie, 92% of what's sold is the theatrical version. So I would say if you're going to watch it, make sure that Blu-ray edition that you have has the director's cut in it. Because I ended up watching the theatrical version just to see the difference, and I promise you it really is a difference. I would argue it's like a BVS level where it's just that much better. The extra 18, 22 minutes, whatever, however much it adds.
All right, I'll have to check that out. I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head whether it does or not, but I will definitely have to take that into consideration while I'm watching this franchise, and maybe I'll have a ranking for you whenever I do, and then we can either agree or even more interestingly disagree on that.
There you go. Look out for that in a future podcast. We will be finding out if Bryce will still be my best friend or not. Uh, all right. Well, this has been Defending Bad Movies. I feel like we actually had a lot of really good conversation, and the only one that is like I said, the Planet of the Apes 2001, I feel like is the only one that maybe people could have guessed going into this. I feel like a lot of the ones we brought up maybe weren't like the mainstream choices. So I think we did a pretty good job.
I agree. I think this definitely made for some interesting conversation.
Yep. All right. Everybody have a good day.